Well, hello, everybody. My name's Vince Desmond. I'm the Chief Executive of the Chartered Quality Institute, and it is my pleasure, as we've hit the top of the hour, to welcome you all to this first webinar discussion of World Quality Week 2023. Today's topic, artificial intelligence, decision-making, how quality professionals thrive and prosper. And what a topic that is. Certainly the topic of the month, as we have had the AI summit in the UK, as well as executive orders announced from the USA White House. Certainly the topic of the year, as regulators consider how to regulate AI. The International Standards Organization has been busy with AI management system standards. And of course, industry has been busy investing in developing and finding use cases for AI. And perhaps it's also the topic of the century as our society grapples with the idea of AI Terminator or utopia for humanity. So we've just had the UK AI Summit in just north of London at Bletchley Park. And I suppose the first question for me is, what do we learn from the UK Summit? First of all, it's being treated, as they said, the most disruptive force in history. Again, back to that balance of value and risk, utopia or terminator. Under the Bletchley Park Declaration, the world has agreed to share and collaborate on risk and regulation, but this intent remains very high level. And we learned that industry wants a referee. It wants regulation. But what does that mean? How is AI best refereed at the organizational, national and global levels? And what has this got to do with quality management and the quality professional anyway? To put that in some context, I'll remind you that the purpose of the CQI under our Royal Charter is to advance education and quality management in all sectors for the benefit of society. And our vision is one where a world thrives through excellence in quality management, delivered through our leadership in quality practice in the service of society. Our view is that if technology and AI is the most disruptive force in history, and this is about the balance of value and risk, then quality management, goods, governance, assurance and improvement has a lot to offer. As we observe products, services and processes being digitalized, the implications for quality and quality management should become obvious to us all. And going back to some historical complaints that executives and boards do not take account of quality management, it's not seen as a board level agenda, perhaps AI, the digital agenda, sustainability, which are on their agenda, provides a once in a century opportunity for the quality profession to reverse that perception. And if we don't, of course, others will. So with that in mind, I'm delighted to welcome an old friend of the CQI. Greg Hutchins is an engineer by training. You may know him as a champion for risk-based thinking through his excellent books. And if you get it, the CERM Insights newsletter. But most recently, Greg has given some deep thought to the AI topic. And I'm very grateful, Greg, that you are here to bring this topic to life for us, especially at this interesting point in the debate on AI. And I hope provide us with some inspiration and challenge on how the quality professional responds. After we've heard from Greg, he and I will have a discussion on the topic, focusing on some of these key points for the quality community. If you have a question, a point of view, please put that in the Q&A function, which you'll see somewhere, an icon for that somewhere on the platform today, and we'll do the best to weave that in. So with that, Greg, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me pretty well?
Perfect. We can hear you. We can see the slides. The technology is working.
Good, good. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much, CQI. Thank you very much for the CQI board, and may we wish all of you a happy World Quality Week. Something that we need more of, probably all 365 days of the year. I'm going to go through these slides rather quickly. so that we can have some conversation. We'll have some fun with this presentation. The first thing we're going to cover is a story. Everybody loves a story. And I have one about AI that just happened about 2 weeks ago. Then I'm going to go into the AI context. A friend of mine many years ago said, context is worth 20 IQ points or EQ points. And I think he was referring to me. I don't know what that says about me, but as a firm believer of context, I get it finally. I'm going to go into AI decision-making. And there's really two parts to AI decision-making, the social and the technical. And what do I mean by that? Hi, artificial intelligence is so broad, so impactful that it has a social element and a technical element. The first half of the talk will deal with the social piece, which is why. Why is AI important? Why does it matter to you? What impacts will it have on you? And the technical piece is what is easier for me, quite honestly, because it's technical. I'm a geek, I'm an engineer, and I can address that pretty easily. Then we're going to talk about the technical context. In the social context, we're going to be answering the why question. In the technical context, we're going to be answering 3 other types of questions. What are we going to audit against or assure against? 2, how are we going to assure? And 3, who's going to do it? Then finally, we're going to talk about your futures, which I think are going to be very broad. Now, a quick story. When I wrote the description for the seminar, I said with a big banner, listen, attend, because this will basically share with you how to double your salary. I think CQI pulled that out. They probably thought I was clickbaiting. So first, a story. 2 weeks ago, I finished a book called Trust Me, AI Risk Management, and we needed a cover. So normally we could have farmed it out, outsourced it, or we could have done it internally. We decided to do it internally. So that begs the question, what are we going to do? Now, I saw this picture of Hamlet. It's a very famous picture of Hamlet holding a skull of a human and saying, alas, poor Yorick. And Yorick, the skull, was a jester in the king's court. And all of us who've gone through high school or UK equivalent have probably read Hamlet in some form or at least seen a movie. But in this case here, we have Sarah Bernhardt, a female playing a male. She's playing Hamlet. And we, again, the problem we were trying to solve is come up with a cover for our book. And the book, again, is risk management. So we decided, she flipped the script, female playing a male role. Why can't we do the same? So in other words, we went to a computer AI program, and it was Microsoft's image AI program. And we basically put in the prompt, give me a photorealistic picture of Hamlet holding a human skull, but make Hamlet a robot. Again, we flipped the script. We wanted Hamlet to have an image of a robot. And again, the tagline was, Hamlet said, alas, poor Yorick. And here we wanted to have a tagline that says, AI robot, alas, poor human. And again, you can memify it. You can have a lot of fun with this type of concept. So we decided to see where it went. And these are the 4 images we got from the program. First image was, okay, it was pretty good. We had a robot holding a skull, but we didn't like the robot's expression. Second image we got was a hateful image looking at a human skull. And this is not what we wanted to convey. With that type of cover on a book, how many books would we sell? Probably 0. The third image we got was a quizzical look, looking at the side of the skull. But again, it was a little bit too hateful. Now notice what's happening in the program. It recognizes the fact that what we need is a robot, being Hamlet, holding a human skull. The program, the AI program, understood the context of what was going on. In the second image, the program started clothing the robot in a period type of clothing, Elizabethan. Third was more Elizabethan, but still, we didn't like that image. And then in the fourth image, we have a heroic, potentially angelic type of robot. And we had the human, obviously, in a worse situation. But none of them really fit the needs of what we wanted, which was a picture of a book, picture on a book called Trust Me, AI Risk Management. Finally, we settled on this. This was the fifth picture the program gave us. It had the right colors. It had the robotic look. It was holding the skull. It had the arm across the chest, implying trust. And it was clothed in an Elizabethan garb, which was period. It fit the period. It also fit the look. But do you see any problems with this image? Look at the image carefully. And again, this is all AI generated. And this was the fifth image we got from the program. We didn't change the prompt at all. But yes, 6 fingers is one. The second problem is there's a hole in the skull. And we thought it was fairly clever, but it's not, doesn't fit the purpose of what we want. We don't endorse violence. We don't believe in violence. So what did we do? We kept the hand across the chest, 6 fingers. That was okay. But there's 3 holes in the skull. And that I thought was going beyond the red line of decency, the red line of violence. So basically, we airbrushed those 3. And this is the cover of the book. So there's several takeaways in this. First is we've been doing AI for 45 years. We started with Lisp, and now we're doing generative AI. These programs are becoming very smart. We were also early adopters of many of these programs, Bard, ChatGPT. And in 2 years, these programs have become very smart. And the 2 things that we noticed through this exercise is, one, the program, the AI, the box, the machine was able to contextualize a question. 2, it was able to nuance our question. How? We asked just simply for a robot, but it put a robot in a historical garb, Elizabethan garb, clothing. 2, it provided the right look for the robot. And 3, it held the skull of Yorick, in this case a human, at the right angle. And finally, it was able to put the arm across the chest, implying trust me. What's happening in these programs, AI programs, the machine, is they're becoming smarter and more capable. And seemingly, and I put that in quotes, humanoid or human. I wouldn't say they're human, not yet, but they're becoming smarter. In this case, it was able to contextualize, nuance, and parse our question historically. Never seen this before. So I'm going to go into AI context. And in this context, I'm going to define some terms and explain the size of the market that we're talking about. Just for comparison's sake, right now, the global web market is 81 billion US dollars. And by the way, all the numbers I'm going to quote for the slide are denominated in US dollars. So they're all been equalized. So the web market is about 81 billion. The UK market right now is about 3.2 trillion dollars. Large economy. Projections for 2030, and again, remember, this is only 7 years away. The projections for the AI market, they're ludicrous, they're stunning, is 1.8 trillion. So here we have 1,800 billion. That's essentially 1.8 trillion. And on the high side, we have 15.7 trillion from PwC, Pricewaterhouse. In other words, the AI market in 2030 will be 0.6 to 5 times greater than the UK GDP. It's phenomenal. It's a growth curve that doesn't go like this, or like a hockey stick or whatever. It's almost straight up. And the point is, AI is growing, and its impacts on us are going to be huge. So just a couple definitional terms. What's AI? AI is the ability of a machine or a system to mimic human intelligence. And I tried to show that with Yorick, the Hamlet example. And big question is, why should it matter to you? What I'm going to be talking about, and again, AI is in everything. AI is a smartphone, it's in Alexa, Siri. It's also in machines. IoT, Internet of Things. Cars, driverless autonomous vehicles, have LiDAR recognizing humans. What I'm going to be talking about and what we're going to be discussing today is really public-facing, public policy, decision-making that impacts people. We're not going to talk about LiDAR in autonomous vehicles. We're not going to talk about non-decision-making. We're really going to talk about decision-making machines or autonomous decision-making. And that's very important. The other thing is I'm not going to read off the slides. You'll have three options. One, you'll have the slide deck that Vince will share with you. Two, you'll have the recording. I hope you do. And three, you can reach out to CQI or myself for additional information. So AI, at the end of the day, comes down to trust. And we'll talk about why. AI is seen through a risk filter. We don't trust it. We can't explain it often. And we don't understand it. When things are unexplainable and we don't understand it, what happens? Fear arises and we don't trust the technology. This is what's happening. So in about 6 domains, which I'll cover very briefly, AI risk is impacting trust. We don't trust the machine anymore. In public policy, AI is running ahead of decision makers. Workers, probably the number one fear is we're going to be replaced by Terminator or some type of equivalent. And that's for real. And we can talk about that in a little bit. Professions, I think every profession is going to be changed. Some will be disrupted. Some won't even exist in 3 to 5 years. Now, an interesting thing, I thought in many cases that professions would be disrupted 10 years down the road. This technology is growing so quickly and accelerating so quickly that I think professions are going to be changed, maybe not disrupted, but changed within 2 or 3 years. And by the way, the professions that will be disrupted are going to be auditing, legal, and product development. Another area that I think is going to be changed is companies now are developing AI products. This is one reason why in 2030, again, only 7 years away, the market for AI is going to be 1.8 trillion or almost $18 trillion. Everybody's jumping into this. Now, the future issues, maybe that's another talk if CQI is and would like me to talk about it, would be the statutes, the definitions, the regulations, assurance, accountability, implementation. All of those almost changing monthly. Let me say that again. We're behind the AI curve, and what we're doing in almost everything is playing catch up. So I could talk about every one of these things, and that could be a separate talk. But the point is, AI is going to impact us as individuals in each one of these areas. And when it impacts us and makes decisions, it can become discriminatory. Let's say that you have a pre-existing condition, and the pre-existing conditions in the database, and the AI basically makes a decision to revoke or to deny you health care. Or facial recognition. This is a big issue right now throughout the world. The EU expressly prohibits facial recognition AI systems. Absolutely. Only one problem. Commercial governments are applying that. Commercial companies are applying that, right now in transportation. And again, you could do it if it's in a public place. But what they're doing is they're preempting the regulation. The EU Act, which should come out probably in 24, maybe 25, expressly prohibits facial recognition, AI systems. But commercial companies are doing it, and we're basically behind the public policy regulations. Anyway, every one of those, and I could probably bring up 20 areas, will impact us individually. And quite frankly, we are not ready. So picture this for your organization. This happened this year in New York. New York passed a law called New York Law 144. It basically required every company that hires people, does employment pre-screening, employee selection, to basically have, and you could read this, I'm not going to read the screen, to be AI audited, risk audited. Only one problem. Nobody knew how to do it. There weren't auditors to do it. There weren't standards against which to audit against. There were no compliance standards or regulations. So this is what happened. The law came out in January of this year. They pushed it out to June and then finally, I think, July. But they're not enforcing it. Why? The three questions. What are you going to audit against? Who's going to do the auditing and how are you going to do the auditing have not been decided on. So what we're going to be talking about for the next 20 minutes is really the rules of engagement between human and machine. The rules of engagement, another way to put that, are rules for developing assurance or trust. You can think of trust and assurance as being equivalent words, synonymous, in other words. We need to understand, and that's, I think, the future of our profession, quality, is to work with the humans and the machines to develop some type of trust or assurance. Anyway, here are the common images that we have of robots. Crush, kill, destroy, and there's another one from Terminator. And what we want to do for the next 10, 20 minutes is talk about the rules of engagement between human and machine on autonomous decision-making. So let's first deal with the why issue. Why is this important? And I'm going to spend a couple minutes very briefly explaining various types of social contexts of autonomous decision-making and why it matters to us, to humans. A couple of things about AI decision-making. It's everywhere. Quite often it's black box decision-making. In other words, we don't know what's going in, we don't know what's going out, and we don't know what's happening in between. And that's an important point. Why? I've been involved with AI 40 some odd years. The first language, AI language, was called Lisp, L-I-S-P. What came in as an input came out. In other words, there was a causal relationship between inputs and outputs. As decision-making evolved and smarter systems were involved for decision-making, eventually there were inputs and there were outputs, but they were correlated. In other words, there would not be a one-to-one mapping between input and output. There would be a correlative type of relationship. So the first type was causation, input-output causation. Second type of decision-making was correlative. Now with generative AI, we get inputs that are coming in and outputs that sometimes don't even match. We call that AI hallucinations. In other words, what's happening in the box of decision-making sometimes is not explainable and is often not understood. And that's one of the things that we can do as quality professionals is help bridge that gap, because bridging that gap between the inputs and outputs is defining the rules of engagement, or another way to say that is providing risk assurance. Another problem is bias gets baked into these algorithmic decision-making methods. The rules of engagement are not defined between the human and machine. And then finally, issues of trust, fairness, equity, explainability, a lot of soft issues tend to get lost. Now, here's the other thing. What we're going to be talking about for the next 5 minutes is really the social part of decision-making, risk-based autonomous decision-making. So let's look at a fast food restaurant. In the US, wages for a McDonald's are 21 bucks an hour USD. So what does the owner do? Margins are very thin, might be 3-4%. What do? They bring in Flippy the robot to flip hamburgers. From the owner's point of view, that makes a lot of sense. But from an immigrant's point of view, who needs that first job to ramp up, to bootstrap himself or herself, automation or AI is really a job killer. Let's look at another form of decision-making. This is the most very popular. What's the role of a driver when we have autonomous vehicles? We're still going to need drivers, truck drivers. But instead of driving the truck, the driver is going to become the owner or the assurance of the vehicle, checking the systems, making sure they're running, loading, unloading the system. So we'll still have work to do during this phase, which I think will last 5 to 10 years. But the work of a professional, of a bus driver, or in the next case, we're going to talk about a radiologist, is really going to become the assurance vehicle between human and machine. This is one which, unfortunately, is very real. On the left, we have a human interviewer. My daughter, now who's 23, is applying for internships. The first 4 tasks for her to get a job are all automated, no human at all. And what happens is that if you have an autonomous decision-making, we're going to have baked-in bias for elderly, such as myself, for people, and we don't want that. This is one which I think we've all heard about. Radiologists. Radiologists are basically able to, are accurate. Let's use the words accuracy and sensitivity for interpreting or diagnosing certain type of skin cancers. They're only about 72.3% accurate. The machine is 99% accurate. That begs the question. You have 16 to 18 years of education, $500,000 invested in the education. You're 32, 30 years old. What do you do when the machine is better at diagnosing cancers than you are? I think what's going to happen is the doctor, the physician, is going to become the interpreter, the assurance mechanism between the patient and the machine. That thing in between, the rules of engagement, just like quality professionals, will help humans and will help the machine define the rules of engagement, provide assurance, build trust between these two elements. And by the way, this can be this tale for many professionals down the road. It's coming very quickly. I live in Portland, Oregon, the US. It's the northwest part of the United States. We have a crime problem. It's almost fearful, unfortunately. Nobody wants to become a police officer in the West Coast. So what we're doing is we're going from human policing to what we call autonomous policing. Now, let me provide a little context. We have 2 very liberal cities in the US, Oakland and San Francisco, right across the bay. Nobody wants to be a police officer. Crime is going up exponentially. What do? These 2 very liberal jurisdictions said, why don't we basically consider having lethal robots? Now, this was last year. The city councils in both cases voted for it. The public outcry was so huge that this was basically, it was removed as a possibility. they're still considering it. Why? Because a year later, crime is skyrocketing. But now, instead of having robots with lethality or lethal, they're just simply going to use robots probably with facial recognition. But again, we're not that far off with having robots with facial recognition, AI, and lethal corrective action, for lack of a better term. Military decision-making. This is what we call the apocalyptic or singularity option. Nobody wants to discuss it. They discuss it so theoretically. But what happens if an AI system sees a signature, a heat signature of a rocket that's aimed to the United States or Great Britain? Or what happens if there are electronics of an offensive nature that an AI system sees? Are we going to give that nuclear system access to nuclear codes to do a preemptive launch, a nuclear launch? That's the singularity that people worry about. What we see on the left here, a robot with a 50 caliber machine gun, I think that's already being used in some battlefields. So that's the why question. That's the social question of AI. Why does it matter to you? Why is it important to you? Why should you pay attention? And why should you care essentially about trust, machine trust especially? For the next 15 minutes, I'm going to be talking about the technical pieces of AI. And I'm going to be addressing three questions. They're very simple questions. What, how, and who? The answers to these questions are really the future of CQI and the future of our profession. Anybody who can come up with answers to these questions will have a unicorn. And the unicorn in the US is a billion-dollar company, billion-dollar with a market capitalization. They're so huge, these questions. And by the way, these are the questions that Google, Amazon, everybody is worrying about, because all of the systems right now, you're not going to compete as a company, as a commercial venture, through your algorithms are out there. And we'll talk about some if the question comes up. The algorithms are out there. Everybody knows them. Databases like LLMs, large language models, sometimes are proprietary. The issue, the competitive differentiator for a company is going to be trust and assurance. Do you trust me, Amazon, to buy stuff online? Do you trust Bard, which is Google, to give you the right answers? So take a look at these questions. I'm not going to read them, but I'm going to address them over the next half a dozen slides. What are we going to audit against, or what are we going to adhere to, or what are we going to comply with? These are all quality-related questions. Two, how are we going to do that? How are we going to test, surveil, audit, review, analyze, or do a forensics on these systems? And three, who's going to do it? It could be CQI. If CQI goes after this, there'll be a 200,000 person organization. But these are the competitive differentiators that a lot of people, a lot of companies are trying to figure out. So what? In the US, and I should make a statement here, we in the US use a different form of compliance, so to speak, or adherence. The EU basically is very prescriptive. We are descriptive. Okay, that's very important to understand. In the US, we have regulations that are descriptive guidelines. In the EU, they are very prescriptive. They have statutes, they have requirements, and basically you comply to those, to the letter of the law, the letter of the regulation. Two different forms of law. So the US in October 22 came up with the US Bill of Rights. 5 elements, I'll go through them quickly. Basically, they start with safe and effective AI systems. Then they say, okay, algorithmic discrimination is embedded or baked into them. Then we need to have data privacy, individual privacy safeguards. Then if there's a breach in any one of those, people need to be notified. Those impacted, those affected need to be notified. And then finally, there needs to be a closeout. Think of this as an AI PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, act. It works. Now, for human alternatives, you could have a CAPA, corrective action, preventive action, or in the US, we'll have litigation. It's a good system, but it's principles based. How do you audit against it? Again, this is a what. The what standard, by the way, is called the NIST AI RMF. So here's a quick tip. The EU and ISO are developing standards. I think right now the standards are not on the street. They're at the DIS stage or the FDIS stage for most of the standards. Also, they cost a lot of money. When I looked at all the AI standards being developed by ISO, I thought in the back of my head, they'll cost $3,000. My first tip to you, Google NIST AI RMF. You can pull it down for free. It's US-based AI, what is specification. This specification, by the way, will probably go into statute in Q1 of 24 in the US. It basically has 4 elements: govern, manage, map, and measure. Very easy to work with. So my first tip for you as a quality professionals, download this. My second tip is get ISO 42001. That's the AI management system standard that I think is in the FDIS stage. FDIS stands for Final Draft International Standard. So what's the EU doing? And this is the thing that's very interesting that I think is the future of CQI in our profession. The EU basically says there are 4 levels of AI risk. You can see them. Level number 2 says all systems, AI systems in this category have to be risk audited. They have to be audited. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. Level 1 says these type of systems like facial recognition are expressly prohibited. Only one problem. Commercial companies are already doing that in the EU. EU doesn't know what to do. They're falling behind in terms of regulatory oversight. And this is going to be an interesting battle in 24 and 25. But I'm going to be talking about level 2. There are 8 areas that are covered in the statute, in the EU AI statute. I'm just going to be looking at level 2, infrastructure. In infrastructure, you have hospitals, bridges, nuclear power plants, but let's just simply take the energy sector. In energy, you have generation, transmission, and use. In generation, you have water, solar, wind, nuclear, fossil. Anyway, you get the idea. LNG, blah, blah, blah. Every one of those is going to be risk assessed. Every one of them are going to have sectoral standards against risk-based standards that you're going to audit or check against or evaluate against. This is going to be a big deal, in other words. Each one of these areas, which are very broad, the EU says is going to be risk audited, probably using a conformity assessment scheme. And that is the essence of this talk. So Canada has something very similar. What they're going to be doing is deferring to ISO 42001. ISO 42001 in 24 is going to be the management system standards for AI. It's very important to check that out right now. And I guess Stephanie just sent that link to everybody. As you can see, SGS is already in the big certification bodies, CBs are already providing certificates to that. Jump on that right now, because I think if the EU puts their statute online, meaning it's promulgated, it's going to be much, much bigger than ISO 9001 in 1987. Anyway, ISO 42001 is basically the usual risk identification, risk assessment, risk treatment, and then some type of monitoring. So this is probably the main slide. If you're in the quality profession, this is the main slide for the talk. EU is basically putting in statute conformity assessment, two types of assessment, product marking and management system. What does that mean? That basically means that ISO standards are going to be put in statute, not best practices, not guidelines, but actually be put into statute. If that's the case, and AI is going to be an $18 trillion industry by 2030, 7 years down the road, this is the future of the profession. This is the way. That's the reason why I said in my little write-up for CQI, show up, because if you listen and you apply lessons learned, you're going to double your salary. The other thing about EU is there's two types of conformity assessment, management system and product. And there's many actually, trust vehicles in between. If that is moved into statute in the EU, everybody in the world will pick it up. And the other thing is, and this is the kicker, EU, as part of Article 17 of the Artificial Intelligence Act, says quality management system is going to be required for all AI systems. Now, that may change because things change almost weekly, if not monthly. But these two things are very important to pay attention to as a quality professional in the UK or frankly anywhere in the world. If 42001 becomes a requirement, there'll be a lot of demand for quality professionals. And if the EU Act, AI Act, says if you've got an AI system, which by the way, every company will, you need to be ISO 9001 certified. And again, you can Google Article 17 of the EU AI Act, and you can basically get a lot of information there. So I'm going to try to address now the how question. The first question I addressed is, what are you going to audit against? What are you going to adhere to? What are you going to comply with? What are you going to surveil against? Now I'm going to be answering the question, how? Big question, very few answers. Right now, what we have is what we call an AI nutrition label. We have companies saying, like Google AI, trust me, because we have Bard, we have Chrome, our AI is trustworthy, it's explainable. OECD has the same thing. Our company is even doing the same thing in terms of AI. We have a label that we use for providing assurance for AI systems. Again, these are all how, commercial type of how solutions. The reason there's only one slide is that there isn't much out there. Now in ISO, we have ISO 19011. But how does that fit into auditing or surveilling an AI system? We don't know yet. So who? I could probably name 10 companies or 10 different commercial companies that are answering the who question. IEEE, Institute of Electrical Engineers, has a certification. ISO has their lead auditor. I can probably give you 10 other companies. And then us. So we've been doing critical infrastructure. Remember that level 2 of the 8 sections that the EU Act has. The most critical one we think is critical infrastructure. We've been doing critical infrastructure, forensics, assurance analytics for almost 20 years. We are the first company and the only company certified by the US Department of Homeland Security. You can see that on the right. What we do and what we've been doing is when we evaluate a system, there's going to be a different level of assurance from a nuclear power plant to a bridge that 20 people go over each day. Now, this is a flaw in the EU Act. They're treating all level 2 risk AI systems similarly, and basically using one form of assurance for all types of AI systems, decision-making systems. What we've done and what we do is we provide different levels of assurance depending upon the risk. So if there's low risk, basically we provide assurance, but there's really not much money involved. So ISO 9001 we would consider a low level of assurance. But if there's a nuclear power plant, we would eventually do a forensics assessment. More controls, more risk controls, more testing, more surveillance, more monitoring. So in other words, you tailor the assurance to the risk that you have in the AI decision-making system. Because again, assurance is trust. So the most probably important thing of the talk, your future. AI is real. I hope I showed that to you in our little story that I showed you early on with Hamlin. By the way, that took us an hour and a half to do. An hour and a half. If we'd farmed that out, it would have cost us $50 to $1,000 US. AI is real. It's coming very quickly. The question is, how is it going to impact our profession, or frankly, all professions? A couple data points. I'm not going to read that. When we talk to people about AI, and we do lots of talks. I do one talk a week. 2 weeks ago, I got 5 requests in 1 week to give a talk. Unfortunately, they're all pro bono, meaning I make no money, but it's a good way to get the word out and to basically plug some of our products. The point is, AI is real. AI decision-making is real. It's going to impact your profession, and it's going to be right now. So here's the summit that was held last week in the UK. A lot of it you can go to YouTube and see. If you look at each one of those, and I'm not going to read it, what's the common element to all of that? Risk. As a professional, quality of decision-making is very important. Don't get me wrong. But we've been advocates for 20 some odd years saying that the future quality is risk. As a matter of fact, in the US, we have a trademark on that, incontestable trademark. We've been pounding the drum, evangelizing on every street corner that the future of our profession is going to be risk-based. And what does that mean for you? To keep up with the profession and hopefully make a lot of money, is you're going to have to become familiar with risk-based decision-making. You're going to have to become familiar with risk assurance. Now, I see there's a question here about risk-based thinking. Unfortunately, that's a misnomer. As somebody who dissects language, how can you audit somebody's thinking? I know ISO picked that up for 9001. That's a great concept. But the reality is you can't audit somebody's thinking. You need to have an audit trail. You need to have evidence. You need to have inputs, process, outputs. You need to have assurance levels. We prefer using terms like risk-based decision-making and risk-based problem solving. That needs to be a core element of what you do and how you differentiate yourself. The second thing is there are 2 big elements to this. There's the human and there's the machine. And then both of those 3, the interface. The interface is the rules of engagement. As you can see from the day 1 summit, the rules of engagement is all about risk assurance. This is going to be a core element for us as quality professionals. So here's some tips and tools for us at CQI. In terms of what, remember, we've already talked about the why issue. Why does it matter? Why is it important to you? I'm not going to address that anymore. But I'm going to talk about what you can do in terms of those 3 questions. What? Get the 42001 FDIS. You can buy it from your national regulatory standards body, or go to your accreditation body or your CB. 2, Google US NIST AIRMF, Risk Management Framework. It's free. The ISO standards tend to be a little bit costly, but that one is free. Get it and base your system on that. The how. By ISO 19011, 2018. It's a 46-page document. I go back to the days of 1990 when the how document was ISO 10011, how to audit a management system. It was only 10 pages long. This new standard that came on in 2018, 7 years ago, great standard. Buy it and use it. Also, do risk-based auditing for first, second, third party. It's going to be really very much required in the AI world. And then basically learn two things: risk-based problem solving, risk-based decision making for yourself. That's going to be your work differentiator. And then finally, who. This is the way that if CQI can answer that question, you're going to go from X amount of members, 19, 20,000 to 200,000 or more. Also, there's going to be a lot of money made in this space. Again, all you have to do is look at that slide that said the market is 1.8 trillion to 17 trillion. That's with a T. Here are some real data points to support you. Right now, this is the amount of money going into VC, venture capital. And you can see at the very bottom, there's algorithmic auditing, which is what we do, and risk management. And then at the very top, there's the investments in AI, generative, large systems, LLM, large language models, LLM. Say that quickly 3 times. Right now, there's a very little being put into the bottom. But that's going to change as the US develops more statutes, as the EU develops the AI Act. What does that mean? That every one of those systems that are almost $27 billion, they're going to have to be audited. And who's going to audit them? You. At least I hope it's you. All righty, I'm going to wrap this thing up and I'll take a couple questions. I'll give you another quick story. This bugs me. I'm an engineer, got much engineering. The number one tool used in ML, machine learning, is gradient descent. Think of it as a mountain. And on the mountain, you're at the top, and there's a bunch of ways to get down to the mountain. And basically, this is using the cost model to iteratively come up with the fastest way going down the model. Think of it as a mini max or a way to optimize something. In the old days, when I did this stuff, you needed 2 years of calculus, 1 year of linear algebra, 1 year of DiffyQ, differential equations, and 1 year of probability. Now, Professor Eng at Stanford teaches that intuitively. 0 calculus. They've got a big fancy what they call cost model. You plug in the numbers. You have a machine basically that gives you an optimized iterative type of solution. All that education that I have, in other words, probably a lot more than that in maths, you don't need anymore. Google offers free courses. Coursera offers free courses, even the UK. So let me give you, this is the final slide I saw. I love this because right now, probably many of our kids, boyfriends or girlfriends, are going to be autonomous voices online. And in terms of matchmaking, what's the future going to look like in terms of companionship? Anyway, thank you very much for your time. I hope I inspired you. I hope I was positive. I hope I can help you make a lot of money.
Thanks so much, Greg. What a way to finish. And I think you have. We've got so many positive comments coming through on the chat and so many questions coming through. Unfortunately, we don't really have time to get into too much detail on the question side of things. But perhaps I could just ask you one before we close up on the who and the how piece. You talked there about the opportunities that are easily available for getting to grips with AI as a topic, and you talked about the risk-based decision making, risk-based audit, and standards. I suspect one question for quality professionals is, how technical is this? How much do I need to learn? Because it seems like a very big, scary, complex black box out there.
I'll give you the Chinese. A 1,000-mile journey starts with a first step. If we can take that first step, then the second, third will be much easier. Just start getting engaged. I'm going to leave with you later on today a couple free resources in terms of jumpstarting your career in this area. I'm going to leave you free courses that I think are the easiest free courses about getting engaged with AI. And
Brilliant.
two, I'll leave you a free PDF. Again, I'm not stealing anything. It's not my copyright. They basically put it out. And these are very recent, within the last week.
That's brilliant. I'm sure everybody on the call and in our profession would be very grateful for those. Greg, it's been eye-opening, it's been entertaining, and it's been based on the chat and the Q&A, it's been inspiring. For those online, I hope you know that the CQI has been doing a lot of work in this area. Greg talked about principles-based regulation, and I hope you've seen the CQI's 8 Quality 4.0 principles. We think a principles-based approach is the way to go. Those of you that have had a look at our new profession map will find a number of new digital-based competencies embedded in that, and I'm sure the courses and the PDF that Greg's going to provide will provide some learning in those areas. And you will, I hope, in the last quality world, have seen a framework for the assurance of digital technologies, which gives another way of thinking about this. There's a lot to learn, a lot to consider, but I think Greg's encouragement to get out there and start doing it, both for us as quality professionals and also, Greg, for the CQI in terms of taking the opportunity, is well heard and well received. So thank you very much. Thanks, folks. Thanks, Greg. Goodbye. Happy World Quality Week.